I'm Margaret, a 66-year-old woman, and my daughter Grace mistakenly forwarded a voice note to me that was intended for her spouse. The shocking things she said about me in that recording prompted me to pack up and depart the following day, armed with a strategy she could never anticipate. "Ricardo, I just can't stand having my mom around the house any longer." Her words hit me like ice in my veins, delivered with a chilling detachment. She's such a bother, poking her nose into every corner. Plus, we're shelling out a fortune on her upkeep, so I've been scouting affordable options. I spotted a spot for just $800 monthly. In that instant, it was like the ground vanished under me. This was the very girl I'd toiled endlessly for, scrubbing strangers' homes around the clock. The one whose university fees I covered by parting with my precious jewels. The same daughter who'd sobbed in my embrace after Richard abandoned her at the altar initially, and I'd drained my final reserves to persuade him to return. Yet the message pressed on, unveiling something even more devastating. Moreover, I've reviewed the property deeds. It's under her name, but I've devised a method to shift ownership to us without her catching on. My relative Carol, employed at the local records office, will assist. My fingers trembled so violently I nearly let the device slip from my grasp. My flesh and blood was scheming to swipe my home, the sole possession of worth I owned in life, the dwelling I'd constructed stone by stone through decades of grueling labor, clocking 12-hour shifts for 30 years. But the deepest wound came from her chuckle at the recording's close. "Come next month, Mom will be tucked away in a facility and it'll all be ours. We can at last enjoy tranquility without that resentful elderly lady dictating our lives." If you've ever endured the sharpest stab of disloyalty from a cherished one, you'll grasp the agony that gripped me then. However, Grace had no clue her mom wasn't the fool she imagined. After 6 decades on this earth, I discovered that self-protection often demands matching the sly tactics thrown your way. Sleep evaded me entirely that evening. As daybreak arrived, I rose fueled by a resolve long dormant. I donned my finest red ensemble, collected my vital papers, and exited the residence wearing a grin, harboring a scheme destined to transform our world irrevocably. To grasp the depth of that pain, you must hear how I evolved into the person I am, and why my bond with Grace became my life's cornerstone. I came from a household where affection was gauged by the burdens you shouldered for kin. My late mother labored as a tailor from 5 a.m. till 10 p.m. to sustain me and my 3 brothers and sisters. Funds were scarce, yet warmth, honor, and solid principles abounded. Margaret she'd instruct while guiding my stitches. In existence, family alone counts, and for them, you pour out every ounce until the end. At 18, when I conceived Grace, her dad vanished like a ghost. Evening prior, he'd vowed matrimony. By sunrise, he was history. His folks barred me at their threshold upon my search, insisting their boy wouldn't squander prospects on a nobody. That's when my mom revealed her true grit. "That little one will claim all we lacked," she assured, cradling me and wiping my sorrow. "Together, we'll nurture her into an honorable soul." She pawned her pair of golden cuffs, her sole ornaments, to equip me for the infant. Grace's arrival felt like heaven's gift. She was the loveliest infant imaginable, with those wide gaze and a beam that brightened any space. Mom and I alternated duties as I labored. From 19 onward, I mopped floors for a meager $20 daily, directing every penny toward her future. I recall sharply the initial occasion I escorted Grace to preschool. We trekked on foot, bus fare beyond reach, though her outfit gleamed pressed and her footwear polished. Affluent parents rolled up in luxury vehicles, clad in finery, leaving me diminished in my mended gown and roughened palms. Yet as Grace pecked my cheek and whispered, "Thanks, Mama. You're unmatched," I realized the effort was priceless. Time marched, my days unchanging. Rise at 4 a.m., fix Grace's meal, drop her at classes, scrub 3 residences till 6 p.m., retrieve her, aid studies, and tuck her in with tales. Saturdays brought wash jobs for bonus cash, solely to grant her superior prospects. Mom departed when Grace turned 8, but not before extracting a vow etched in my soul. Margaret, that girl is your priceless gem. Provide schooling, shower affection, and in your later days, she'll repay you. Our lineage runs true. She won't disappoint. Those words fueled my determination to push forward, even on the toughest days when I felt like throwing in the towel. By the time Grace hit 15, I'd put in overtime for half a year straight to throw her the bash she truly merited. That event ran me $3,500, cash I'd set aside for patching our dripping roof. Yet catching the joy in her eyes that evening, seeing her glow in that golden gown as she twirled on the dance floor, made it all invaluable. Mom, I'm amazed at how you managed to provide so much for me with barely anything to your name, she whispered while wrapping me in a tight embrace. When I get older, I'll return every bit of it to you times 1,000. All through her high school years, Grace stood out as a model pupil. She topped her class in marks, starred in drama productions, and every instructor assured me she was destined for greatness. But funding her education didn't come cheap. Textbooks, outfits, excursions, it added up to bills I could scarcely cover. I picked up a 4th cleaning gig on Sundays, my sole rest day, simply to keep everything afloat. Come time for university registration, the fees hit $15,000 annually. My housekeeping income topped out at $400 monthly. Crunching the numbers, it seemed hopeless. Still, a parent finds a way for their kids no matter what. I secured a loan against our home, parted with the sole engagement band her dad left me before vanishing, and even hawked my late mom's old sewing machine. My girl, I said to Grace on the drive to sign her up. I never got the chance for higher ed, but you're heading there to become something real. You'll earn that diploma, land a desk job in a cooled office, and skip the drudgery of scrubbing strangers' homes like I do. Tears of pure joy streamed down my face as I watched her ink the forms for her business admin program. Over her entire 4-year stint at college, I hustled relentlessly to cover every need. Grace required funds for readings, assignments, hangouts with pals, and sharp attire for class demos. I handed it all over, even if it left me surviving on rice and beans for days to stretch the budget. Her commencement was my ultimate triumph. Watching her stride across the platform in her mortarboard and robe, the announcer booming her name amid thunderous applause, it felt like every hardship had found its reward. Post-ceremony, she pulled me close, tears flowing, and murmured, "Mom, this success belongs to us both. None of it happens without your support. I swear, with my career underway, you'll never endure hardship again." About a year on, Grace crossed paths with Richard through work. Initially, I beamed with delight seeing her so blissful and smitten. He came across as solid, a steady role overseeing operations at the plant, and he doted on my girl. When he formally proposed, emotion overwhelmed me, envisioning the secure home life for Grace that I'd always fallen short of providing. Planning their nuptials demanded yet another massive outlay, though. Grace envisioned a classy affair straight out of glossy pages. The hall ran $8,000, her gown $2,000, tunes $800, blooms $600, totaling $10,000 drained from a fresh loan and the remnants of my trinkets. Their early married days shone bright. Grace and Richard dropped by each Sunday without fail. We'd share meals and she'd chip in for household stuff. "Mom, with my salary now, let me repay your care the same way you nurtured me," she'd insist, slipping me cash for provisions. At last, I sensed my efforts had borne fruit, a devoted child who cherished me deeply. Then, 3 years back, Richard got laid off, sparking money woes that flipped everything. Requests for loans poured in nonstop, and like always, I couldn't refuse. It kicked off with $1,000 for routine bills, escalated to $2,500 toward a vehicle deposit, then $3,000 to clear plastic debts. Shifts crept in right after that $3,000 handout for their balances. Initially, I brushed off minor slips as fallout from their cash crunch. But now, after that voicemail, it's clear it wasn't mere pressure. It marked the launch of a deliberate scheme to sideline me. The initial red flag hit when Sunday visits vanished. "Mom, Richard's fresh gig has us swamped," Grace explained over calls. "You get it. We gotta prove our reliability." I bought it, or tried to. After all, newlyweds prioritizing their climb made sense. Soon dodges piled up for my rings, too. Morning tries. "Mom, crucial conference. I'll ring back soon." Afternoons. "Sorry, grabbing our market haul." Evenings. "Too late, we're eating. Chat tomorrow." That promised tomorrow. It never materialized, and whenever we managed to connect, the chat wrapped up in under 5 minutes. Soon after, the stinging remarks arrived, wrapped up as worry. "Mom, Richard's picked up on how scatterbrained you've become recently," she shared with me one afternoon over one of our infrequent calls. "Do you really think you can manage on your own in that huge place? At your age, who knows what might go wrong?" I chuckled awkwardly, figuring they were overblowing it. Yet a nagging uncertainty had taken root. One day, I showed up at their place unannounced, carrying the pineapple treat Richard adored. As I rapped on the door, I caught sounds of chuckling and chatter from within, but it dragged on nearly 5 minutes before they answered. "Mom, this is unexpected," Grace remarked with a strained grin that never touched her gaze. "We were sorting through a few office files." There, in the kitchen, sat her relative Carol from the county clerk's office, surrounded by a mess of paperwork on the table. Spotting me enter, Carol hastily scooped up the stack and shoved it into a binder. "Hi, Aunt Margaret," she said with her usual phony beam. "Just assisting Grace with Richard's medical coverage forms." No, but I'd spotted my own name flashing on one sheet right before she concealed it. "What's the deal with documents bearing my info?" I inquired, truly puzzled. Grace and Carol shared a glance I couldn't quite read back then, though it makes total sense now. "It's merely to refresh the policy recipients," Grace explained. "You get it, Mom. In the event something befalls us, you're our sole kin." That soothed me initially, but soon I observed how she'd steer away from the topic whenever it arose. "Mom, how's the garden coming along?" She'd pivot. Or, "Hey, Mom, caught that fresh series on Channel 5. That's when the intentional oversights began kicking in. They'd summon me for a meal out, only for me to reach the spot and find them absent. "Sorry, Mom, we meant to mention the cancellation," came the follow-up excuse. Richard dealt with a sudden job crisis. It repeated thrice over 2 months. The 4th instance left me stranded at that eatery solo for a full hour, looking utterly ridiculous, while nearby groups savored their gatherings. They began sidelining me from key family gatherings, too. I learned of it accidentally from my neighbor, Miss Rose, who mentioned their grill out for Richard's birthday. "Odd you missed it, Margaret," she noted. "I watched them stock up on cuts for around 20 folks at the store." When I confronted Grace about the snub, her reply was, "Mom, it was super low-key. Didn't want to impose on you." Yet the tipping point hit when they opted to crash at my place for a spell. "Mom, our flat's getting repainted, so we'll bunk with you for roughly a month," Grace informed me. "Plus, it'll give us more quality moments. Sounds ideal, right?" I was thrilled at the prospect of them nearby once more, hoping we'd recapture our faded bond. Still, right from their arrival, the vibe in my home shifted entirely. Richard griped nonstop. My set was outdated, the web lagged, the faucet trickled weakly. "Auntie, this property's crying out for fixes," he'd declare. "Handling a spread like this at your stage must be a real chore." Grace took to shuffling my belongings unprompted. "Mom, these dishes are ancient. I'll swap them for fresh sets," she'd announce. "And that wardrobe's full of dated outfits. Time to give them away." Gradually, my space lost its familiarity, leaving me like an intruder in my sanctuary. Then came the hushed exchanges that halted at my approach. I'd overhear murmurs from the kitchen, only for them to switch to banal chatter about forecasts or headlines as I stepped in. "What was the discussion?" I'd probe. "No big deal, Mom," Grace would brush off, "only chatting over household costs." One evening, I eavesdropped on Richard's patio call. "Yep, we're settled in now. Nah, she hasn't a clue. Carol figures the docs will be set in another couple weeks." Approaching to question his caller, he claimed it was his supervisor regarding a task. They even edged into overseeing my money matters. "Mom, allow me to handle the utility payments," Grace offered. "You shouldn't fret over such details anymore." I viewed it as thoughtful at first, until I caught her rifling through my account records. "Mom, what's with pulling $200 in cash?" She'd question upon noticing my withdrawal for daily needs. The deepest cut came from overhearing their words about me when they believed I was out of earshot. One afternoon, while I was pruning the shrubs out in the yard, I overheard Richard on the phone saying to somebody, "My mother-in-law's getting tougher to manage these days. She's turning really obstinate as she gets older." From the other room, Grace chuckled and chimed in, "He's right. These past few weeks, she's been misplacing stuff and turning super resistant whenever we offer assistance." But the real wake-up call for me hit when they began dropping hints about my psychological well-being right in front of outsiders. My longtime pal, Miss Letitia, stopped by for a chat, and Grace turned to her with, "You know, Letitia, my mom's been awfully muddled recently. Just last night at 10 p.m., she insisted on heading out for a stroll because she swore it was daytime. Total fabrication. I'd never pulled anything like that. Yet I caught the way Letitia gazed at me, full of sympathy and worry. 'Oh, Margaret, you're lucky to have Grace looking after you,' she remarked. Right then, a surge of fury washed over me, mixed with profound grief, as it dawned that my daughter was spinning a phony tale about my mind. All sorts of unexpected guests began showing up at my door, physicians claiming to monitor my blood pressure, welfare officers inspecting my home setup, and even a fellow who called himself an elder care expert. Grace arranged every one of them, but none bothered to check if I actually wanted them there. In the middle of one such assessment, I eavesdropped on the doctor conversing with Grace out in the den. "Ma'am, your mom's holding up okay on the physical side, but I'll jot down in the file that she's displaying some light cognitive disorientation tied to her years." I was right there in the kitchen, sharp as ever and fully alert, as this stranger jotted down falsehoods regarding my sanity. The atmosphere at home grew suffocating. Day by day the strain mounted, with tighter grip on my choices, sharper barbs hidden behind concern. "Mom, it's time to hang up your keys," Richard declared one morning. "At your stage, it's just too risky." "And Mom, maybe skip solo trips to the store from now on," Grace piled on. "We'll handle it for you." Step by step, they stripped my freedom, my self-reliance, my self-respect. Worst of all, they pulled it off with cheerful grins, insisting it was purely out of love, that they cherished me and just aimed to protect me. The incident that flipped my existence upside down arrived that Tuesday in the late afternoon, triggered by a mere glitch in tech that exposed the harshest reality I'd faced across my 66 years. That day proved especially rough. Grace and Richard had headed out first thing, mentioning business errands, though I sensed trouble brewing. I'd spotted their hushed exchanges throughout the morning, and when I probed, they flashed those phony grins I'd come to spot. "Nothing to worry about, Mom," Grace would brush off. "Just tedious work stuff for Richard." Alone in the place once more, that tightness in my chest from the prior weeks intensified. What had been my sanctuary now resembled a cage. Life shifted completely after they moved in for what was supposed to be a short stint. My habits, my areas, even my daily rhythm got reshaped to fit their whims and hidden schemes. Near 3 Talmar p.m., as I brewed some chamomile to soothe my jitters, my phone buzzed with a voice note from Grace. Initially, I figured she was updating me on a delay, or perhaps requesting a nice meal for supper. How foolish of me to assume my girl still valued me enough to share her whereabouts. I hit play, oblivious that the coming 3 minutes would shatter my world. "Richard, I can't stand having my mother around this place any longer." Grace's voice kicked off, laced with irritation she'd never directed at me face to face. My pulse froze. That disdain in her tone cut like knives into my heart. This wasn't the affectionate child who'd wrap me in hugs and whisper, "I love you, Mom," before departing. She's an absolute hassle, Richard. Meddles in all our affairs, constantly prying forever underfoot. Plus, the cash we're shelling out on her is piling up. I've been scouting budget options. Spotted a spot on the edge of town for just $800 monthly. The savings could let us finally update that kitchen we've craved and snag fresh pieces for the den. Each phrase landed like a punch. My flesh and blood, the one I'd poured my whole existence into raising, spoke of me like disposable junk ready for the trash. That $800 figure, it matched precisely the sum I'd handed them monthly for their own spending, drawn straight from my retirement check and modest nest egg. But the recording pressed on, and the following bit utterly crushed me. On top of that, I've gone over every document for the property. It's titled in her name, but Carol's already outlined how we can shift it over to us without I was just starting to piece it all together. The costs would run around $500 for the payoffs and paperwork, but it seemed like a solid investment. My relative had navigated similar setups before. Right then, it hit me like a ton of bricks. Those offhand drop-ins from Carol, lugging her stacks of files, the hushed talks that cut short whenever I walked in, the experts who'd poked around my home and probed my mind. It was all a carefully laid scheme to label me unfit and snatch away what was mine. My home, the one I'd constructed stone by stone, grinding through 12-hour shifts day in and day out for 3 full decades, the place where I'd nurtured Grace, thrown her birthday parties, shed tears at her college commencement, and imagined my grandkids romping through the rooms someday. That very home, valued at roughly $485,000, embodied every penny I had, my retirement dreams, my sense of stability. I've already chatted with the head at St. Francis residence, Grace pressed on, her voice laced with an icy detachment that sent shivers down my spine. I laid out the details for him. I mentioned how Mom's showing signs of early dementia, and it's risky for her to be on her own. He couldn't have been more supportive. He noted they handle situations like ours constantly. I've gone ahead and inked the initial intake forms. My knees buckled so badly that I sank down onto the kitchen tiles. My flesh and blood had deceived some outsider about my sanity. She'd authorized my confinement without a word to me, handling it as casually as booking a trip. "It's airtight, sweetheart," she added, addressing Richard. "Come Tuesday, we'll convince her it's just a standard checkup. We'll drive her straight to the facility, get her settled, and before she catches on, she'll be locked in, with us holding power of attorney. Carol assures me that those psych evaluations we obtained, the ones citing her cognitive fog, make it a breeze to show she's unfit to handle her own affairs. Those phony assessments they'd cooked up through shady physicians, the ones I'd greenlit believing they were routine health checks. It was nothing but a sham to compile a dossier that would strip me of my autonomy and entitlements." In the distance, I caught Richard chuckling and tossing in remarks I couldn't quite make out, though his supportive vibe was unmistakable. The guy I'd folded into our lives, bailed out with money, cherished like my own boy, was now knee-deep in the plot to shatter my world. "The real kicker," Grace went on, her laughter slicing through me like glass, "is she'll have zero clue. In her eyes, we're the flawless offspring who worship the ground she walks on. She still coos, 'Thanks for looking after me, dear,' whenever I serve her that tray in the morning. If only she realized I'm dishing out that meal to soothe her while I orchestrate her living burial." At that instant, a piece of me shattered beyond repair. It went deeper than the treachery, deeper than the agony of learning my girl despised me. It was the sheer mortification of grasping that as I whispered nightly blessings, praising the heavens for such a devoted child, she was tallying the hours till she could cast me aside. With the $485,000 from the property sale, we can wipe out the credit cards, the auto debt, and pocket extra for that long-dreamed-of European getaway, Grace rambled further. And get this, we won't need to fake affection anymore. No more forced weekend meals choking down her awful cooking. No more enduring those endless tales from her glory days. Each phrase landed like a fresh wound, Those meals I'd slaved over with pure devotion every Sunday just to lure them over. Those anecdotes I'd shared to pass on the joys of my early years, to bond over our heritage. What I'd seen as warmth and ties turned out to be burdens they tolerated grudgingly. In a month's time, Mom will be tucked away at the home, and it'll all be ours, Grace wrapped up. We can breathe easy at last, free from that sour crone bossing us around. Plus, her policy lists us as beneficiaries, so if anything goes awry there, Lord help me for voicing it. It wouldn't hurt our cause. Her final words turned my veins to ice. They weren't content with robbing my home and liberty. They'd methodically weighed how my passing would sweeten the deal. They'd reduce their mother to a financial play, eyeing gains from my existence and my end alike. The recording wrapped with their guffaws and chatter about picking an eatery for the evening, as though they'd mapped out a holiday rather than the utter ruin of the woman who'd treasured them above all else. I remained slumped on that kitchen floor for what felt like an eternity, gripped tight on the phone, looping the audio endlessly, praying I'd misheard, yearning for it to dissolve into a bad dream I could simply awaken from. I stirred awake that morning, but each replay of the truth hit harder, stripping away any illusions and deepening the hurt. That evening, food wouldn't go down, sleep evaded me, and all I could manage was pacing through my home, eyes lingering on every item, every snapshot, every piece of the life I'd crafted, envisioning a day when I'd hand them over to my girl with care. Yet now it hit me. Everything faced looting, auction, or dumping, with zero regard for the history tied to them. As I roamed the dim rooms in the early hours, a shift stirred within. The grief and ache morphed into an emotion I'd long forgotten, sharp, icy resolve. My child saw me as a gullible senior, ripe for exploitation. Little did she know the depth of the mother who'd brought her up. By first light, my mind sharpened like it hadn't in ages. I slipped into my finest red ensemble, reserved for big moments. I snatched my bag stuffed with key papers and slipped out before Grace or Richard stirred. A strategy was forming, and they were clueless about the storm ahead. That dawn, my internal clock buzzed at precisely 5 a.m., as if sensing this pivotal chapter. Through the sleepless night, I'd mapped out each step, each phrase, every nuance of my counterstrike. Gone was the trusting Margaret who'd let her daughter pull strings for so long. This day, I'd proved to Grace just how much she'd misjudged her upbringing's architect. I donned that red trouser set, the very one from her university ceremony. I applied cosmetics with precision, arranged my locks with poise, and clipped on the pearl studs from my late mother. I aimed to project the resilient, composed figure I truly was, not the easy mark they imagined. Prior to departing, I jotted a quick message for the counter, headed out early for private errands, back by afternoon. With love, Mom. No further info, they'd earn none. For too many months, they dictated my path sans input. Now my actions stood independent, explanation-free. My initial destination, the bank. I pulled up right at opening, 8 sharp. "Morning, Ms. Baker," greeted Nora, the branch head who'd dealt with me over 15 years. "What brings you in?" "Nora," I stated steadily, catching her off guard. "Pull up every transaction from my account over the past 6 months. Also, update all beneficiaries, and clarify if anyone's probed my details without permission." Nora's brow creased as she scanned my records digitally. "Ms. Baker, logs show multiple checks on your holdings by your daughter, Grace. She showed a signed note from you, granting access to statements for financial aid." Rage surged through me. "Nora, I never penned that. Show me the paper." Spotting the so-called approval, I clocked the fake scrawl instantly. It mimicked mine, but with an off-kilter angle I'd never used. "This is falsified," I declared, flashing my ID for side-by-side checks. "My daughter's illegally prying into my banking. Revoke her permissions now and flag the account for security." Nora blanched, grasping the gravity. "Ms. Baker, this demands attention. We'll block all illicit entries right away, and I urge filing a fraud claim." "That's my next move," I affirmed. "But priority, safeguard my resources, shift everything to a fresh account under my sole control, and redirect my policy payout. Over the following hour, Nora guided me through fortifying my wealth. I moved my $8,750 savings into an untouched profile. I reset every login and designated a nonprofit for overlooked elders as my insurance heir. Not a dime would touch Grace anymore. Next, the local records hall where Carol, Grace's scheming relative, held court. I showed up unannounced, a discreet audio device tucked in my bag. "Hello, Carol," I chirped with feigned warmth. "Here to track my estate's progress. Grace mentioned your assistance on forms." Carol jittered at once. "Aunt Margaret, what?" Grace said nothing about a visit. Her fingers shook, fumbling to stash desk files. "No fuss, Carol," I kept light. "Just clarifying this policy filing Grace mentioned. Mind detailing which papers require my signature." Sweat beaded on Carol's forehead. Auntie, standard registry tweaks." Her tone fractured as I came to the realization that I possessed far more knowledge than I had initially revealed. "Carol," I stated, leaning in closer, "I'm fully aware of the scheme you and my daughter have been concocting. I understand the fabricated paperwork. I know the intention to seize my home, and I realize you've been assisting her in falsifying records by leveraging your role here." I displayed my phone, featuring the audio recording from the previous day. "I've got solid evidence of it all." Carol sank back into her seat. "Aunt Margaret, I never meant for this to happen, but Grace insisted you were no longer capable of managing alone, that it was meant to benefit you." "This was about the money, Carol. Stop acting like it was for my welfare," I responded sharply. "You now face two choices. Assist me in undoing all this mess, or I'll march right to your supervisor and present the proof of your involvement in counterfeiting official forms." Tears welled up in Carol's eyes. "Please, Aunt, I can't afford to lose my position. I've got 3 children depending on me." Sobbing, she detailed the whole operation, how they'd mimicked my signature on multiple files, produced phony health evaluations, and intended to employ them to deem me unfit, thereby shifting ownership of my assets. "Okay, Carol," I declared once she'd spilled every detail. "You're going to aid me in correcting this, and afterward, you'll seek new employment. But if you cooperate fully right now, I won't pursue legal action against you." In the following couple of hours, Carol guided me through nullifying every bogus document they'd generated. She also handed over duplicates of all materials for my records, such as the counterfeit medical assessments and the drafted asset transfer papers. My next destination was with Harrison Ford, the city's premier legal expert. "Attorney Ford," I began, presenting the gathered proof, "I require your assistance to halt this deception and safeguard my interests." With meticulous scrutiny, Attorney Ford examined the paperwork. "Miss Baker, this constitutes a grave instance of familial deceit. The documentation provides ample grounds for criminal proceedings. However, what precise outcome are you seeking?" "Justice, Attorney," I answered. "Above all, I want my daughter to grasp that her choices carry repercussions. For 66 years, I've been overly lenient, excessively giving, and far too forgiving. It's high time someone stood up for me, even if that someone is myself." The attorney grinned appreciatively. "Miss Baker, we'll devise a comprehensive legal plan that secures your entitlements and delivers a stark warning on the perils of swindling an elderly individual." Over the ensuing hours, we drafted a civil suit alleging deception, document tampering, and an effort to unlawfully claim property. Additionally, we filed a criminal accusation targeting Grace, Richard, and Carol. The attorney assured me of a robust position with strong prospects of reclaiming any inflicted losses. As the afternoon waned, I headed back home transformed. Gone was the fragile target who'd departed earlier. In her place stood a determined woman, reclaiming command of her destiny, prepared to confront the fallout from decades of tolerating exploitation of her goodwill. Upon entering, Grace and Richard lounged in the den, glued to the TV, feigning normalcy. "Hello, Mom," Grace greeted with that insincere grin I'd grown adept at spotting. "How'd your tasks go?" "Splendidly, dear," I answered evenly. "I handled precisely what required attention." I settled into my preferred chair and fixed them with a steady gaze. "Incidentally, visitors are arriving tomorrow. I trust you'll both be present to greet them." "What visitors, Mom?" Richard inquired, intrigued. "You'll find out," I replied with an enigmatic smirk. "They're folks who'll assist in sorting out key matters regarding our family's path ahead." That evening, our meal passed in quiet tension. I was acutely aware of the impending events while they remained oblivious to the tempest brewing. For the first time in ages, I slumbered deeply, comforted by the certainty that retribution drew near. The following morning, promptly at 10 ski, the chime sounded. "I'll answer," I announced, rising swiftly to preempt Grace or Richard. Standing there was Attorney Harrison Ford, accompanied by 2 law enforcement officers and a certified notary. "Good morning, Miss Baker," the attorney greeted. "We're here to carry out the directives from our prior meeting." Grace and Richard rose from the couch, their expressions a mix of bewilderment. "Mom, what's this about?" Grace demanded. "Who might these individuals be?" "Take a seat," I instructed, my tone carrying an unfamiliar firmness. "You both need to hear the facts." Attorney Ford cleared his voice and addressed them. "Ms. Grace and Mr. Richard, I'm representing Miss Margaret to notify you that we've uncovered undeniable proof of deceit, record forgery, and plotting to unlawfully seize her holdings." Grace and Richard paled dramatically. "What nonsense is this?" Grace muttered, her voice faltering. "We'd never stoop to such things." "Well," I replied, pulling out my cell phone, "would you like me to broadcast that voice note you mistakenly forwarded to me last night for the whole group to hear?" Right then, I watched the color vanish from my daughter's cheeks, her gaze brimming with sheer terror as the truth hit her. Her flawless scheme had unraveled due to her own slip-up. The reckoning was here, and retreat was impossible. The quiet in my den hung heavy like a shroud. Grace and Richard froze in place, gaping at me like I'd risen from the grave. For months on end, they'd assumed they held all the cards, treating me as a frail senior they could bend to their whims. But now it dawned on them. They'd gravely misjudged the very woman who'd brought them up. "Mr. Ford," I declared, holding my tone steady and composed, "go ahead and lay out the proof." The lawyer unlatched his satchel and retrieved a hefty dossier packed with papers. "Ms. Grace and Mr. Richard, we've gathered undeniable proof of the offenses you've perpetrated against Ms. Margaret." He set the initial files down on the low table. "We'll begin with the falsifications." He displayed to Grace the form she'd endorsed at the financial institution, granting herself entry to my funds. "Here's her genuine mark," he noted, indicating my identification card. "And here's the fake one you submitted there." The contrast stood out starkly when compared directly. "I have no idea what you mean," Grace faltered, yet her words quivered so fiercely that her deceit was plain. "Mom requested my aid with her finances since she kept overlooking the payments." "Grace," I responded with a tranquility that caught even me off guard. "Cease the falsehoods. You're cornered." I grabbed my device and hit play. My girl's voice echoed through the space. "Richard, I'm done enduring my mom here at home. She's an utter burden. She meddles in every aspect of our lives." I observed Grace's expression crumble utterly as her own statements rang out. Richard fought to stay collected, though his fingers trembled noticeably. Neither had grasped that the recording had gone to me in error. "I've scouted a few budget options. Spotted one for just $800 monthly." "Shut it off!" Grace shrieked, diving toward my phone, but an officer swiftly restrained her. "That's confidential. You're not allowed to hear my talks." "Easy there, dear," I said with an icy grin. "We're only warming up. Take a seat and absorb all the schemes you plotted against your mom." The recording pressed on. Carol's outlined the steps to shift the property into our possession without her catching on. It'll run us around $500 in payoffs and costs, but the payoff's huge. Richard bolted upright. "This is a trap," he accused, jabbing a finger at the lawyer. "You're twisting her mind to pin false charges on us." Mr. Ford offered a polished smirk. "Mr. Richard, the real highlights are still coming." He drew forth another sheet from the binder. "This is the full notarized admission from Carol Rodriguez, Ms. Grace's relative, employed at the local registry." My stare locked with Grace's, and I caught the flash of betrayal. She knew Carol had turned. "In this statement," the lawyer went on, "Carol outlines precisely how you coerced her into faking public records, fabricating bogus health assessments, and intending to wield them to deem her mentally unfit." "Carol's a fraud," Grace wailed in anguish. "She invented it all to protect herself." "Is that so, sweetheart?" I queried, producing my compact voice device. "Since I've got the entire exchange I recorded with Carol in her workspace just yesterday." I activated it, and Carol's tearful admissions flooded the air. "Grace convinced me you were no longer capable. She demonstrated forging your mark. She vowed $2,000 compensation after securing the property." Richard slumped onto the couch, clutching his skull. "This can't be real," he muttered. "It spiraled beyond reason." "Actually, Richard," I countered resolutely, "this is accountability. The true horror was existing in my residence like a captive, overhearing your disdain for me as a hassle, witnessing your intent to plunder every achievement of my lifetime." Mr. Ford pressed forward with the disclosures. "We've also secured the phony health evaluations you arranged." He presented the papers from shady physicians claiming I suffered senile dementia and lacked decision-making capacity. Ms. Margaret willingly completed a comprehensive mental assessment yesterday, overseen by Dr. Raymond Morales, a senior care expert at General Hospital. He unveiled the formal assessment. "Findings confirm Ms. Margaret possesses flawless cognitive health, with sharper insight and logic exceeding norms for her years. This debunks every prior evaluation as contrived." Grace burst into tears, yet they stemmed not from regret, but from utter despair as her scheme unraveled entirely. "Mom, please," she begged me. "We only wanted to look after you. We figured it would help if you went somewhere with proper medical care." "Look after me," I retorted with a sardonic chuckle. "By swindling my home, fabricating claims about my sanity, and scheming to lock me away without permission." I rose from my seat and approached her. "Darling, in that recording, you even wished for my quick passing so you could claim my insurance payout." "I didn't say that," Grace shrieked. I played back that exact segment of the audio. "Plus, the policy on her life is listed under our names, so if anything occurs to her in the facility, Lord forgive me for uttering this, it might not be such a tragedy." The ensuing quiet was utterly crushing. The cops themselves traded glances of revulsion at a child discussing her parents' demise as a monetary windfall. "And there's additional proof," the lawyer announced, pulling out yet another file. "Over the past 6 months, Ms. Grace has been siphoning funds from her mother's accounts illicitly, using pilfered details to do so." He presented the statements revealing transfers from $500 up to $2,500, every one executed by Grace. In sum, they've pilfered $8,750 from Ms. Margaret's holdings. "That cash went toward household costs," Richard objected. "We covered groceries and bills." "That's false," I countered. "I handled every utility and mortgage payment myself from my retirement funds. The sum you took funded your lavish indulgences. I watched you splurge on designer outfits and dine at upscale spots, all while insisting we tighten our belts due to hard times." The lawyer pressed on, unveiling each facet of their illicit scheme. "Furthermore, we possess records showing you reached out to the administrator at St. Francis facility and forked over a $200 enrollment charge to reserve a bed for Ms. Margaret, all unbeknownst to her, and without approval." He displayed the transaction slip along with the enrollment forms they'd forged in secret. "Your intention was to transport her there this Tuesday, disguising it as a standard checkup." It was all to benefit you, Mom, Grace pressed on in anguish. You'd become so scatterbrained, you'd mix things up at times. Stop the falsehoods, I erupted at last, shedding the restraint I'd held during the entire clash. I've never once been muddled. You fabricated those tales to rationalize your plot. I still oversee my budget, prepare my meals, maintain my property, and even offer you financial support whenever you request it. I fixed my gaze on Grace squarely. What stings deepest, sweetheart? It's not your bid to seize my residence, nor your intent to commit me forcibly. The real wound is that throughout these months, as I embraced you and professed my deep affection, you were tallying the profits you'd reap from my passing. Grace shattered then, sobbing uncontrollably. Forgive me, Mom, I'm truly sorry. We were drowning in financial woes, debts everywhere. We felt cornered. Need doesn't excuse treachery, I stated resolutely. If funds were short, you could have approached me candidly. All my life, I've shared whatever I possessed with you. Yet rather than rely on my devotion, you chose theft and sabotage. The officer stepped forward, cuffs at the ready. Ms. Baker, are you ready to move ahead with the detentions? I regarded my weeping child, a brief surge of parental sorrow twisting inside me. But then her recorded words resurfaced, her icy scheming against me, her mirth over my end. Yes, officer, I affirmed steadily. Carry out the arrests. Watching my flesh and blood get restrained in my own parlor ranked among the most agonizing sights in my 66 years. Yet it marked the instant I reclaimed my self-respect and autonomy after endless weeks of victimhood. Mom, no, Grace cried out as the officer escorted her to the exit. You can't abandon me like this. I'm your flesh and blood, your sole companion in this life. Her plea rang in my ears with cruel mockery. She'd been the one to deem me extraneous in hers. Richard, meanwhile, shot me a glare brimming with raw malice that sent shivers through me. This isn't finished, you senile hag, he muttered, passing by. You'll regret wrecking our futures. His threat didn't unsettle me. It merely validated my choice to unmask them. Once Grace and Richard were removed, my home fell into a profound hush I hadn't known in ages. For the first occasion since their supposed brief stay, I could navigate my space freely, unburdened by surveillance, criticism, or deceit. Still, that serenity proved fleeting. Come the following day, a wave of intimidation commenced. It revealed just how far Grace and Richard would go for their payback against me. The initial assault hit via social media. Grace set up a phony account and began spreading vicious tales about me in neighborhood Facebook groups. My mom suffers from senile dementia and wrongly blamed us for stealing, she posted. She's so disoriented she can't even identify her relatives. If you spot her wandering the streets by herself, reach out to me. She needs constant watching. Those messages came with unauthorized snapshots of me looking weary or unfocused, which they doctored to suggest I was struggling with psychological troubles. The reactions from unknown people were crushing. That poor lady seems totally lost. What a tragedy for a parent to turn on her kids like that. They ought to get her some expert care. My longtime neighbor, Ms. Rose, showed up at my door in a panic after stumbling on those entries. Margaret, dear, are you all right? I came across some awful stuff posted about you and your girl online. I had to walk her through the full story, pulling out my proof so she'd grasp it was nothing but a vicious smear effort. Yet the torment ramped up fast. Calls poured in round the clock, day and night. Unfamiliar callers hurled abuse, issued warnings, and labeled me a monstrous parent who'd wrecked her family for cash. You're a pathetic hag, one snarled. A woman's shrill voice pierced the silence at 3:00 a.m. I wish you'd rot away forgotten and forsaken. Strangers I didn't recognize also began appearing on my doorstep, feigning worry over my safety. Phony social workers claiming tips about me being at risk, pushy vendors peddling alarm systems, arguing an elderly widow like me was easy prey. Even folks posing as far-off kin, there to check on my sanity. Attorney Ford laid it out clearly. This was all a frantic ploy in their court fight. Ms. Baker, they're manufacturing proof of your instability to undermine your statements in the trial. It's a standard move when defendants lack strong arguments. But the deepest wounds came from the spite-filled, anonymous notes that soon started piling up. "You're a lousy mom," one declared. "You brought up a child who loathes you enough to wish you gone. Reflect on your mistakes." Another proved harsher still. "Your kids ditched you 'cause you're unbearable. Nobody will care when you're buried." Those missives didn't just target my bond with Grace. They tore into every hardship I'd endured. "You slaved away as a maid your entire life. And why? So your girl could scorn you. You were a sap who got exploited." Each phrase was crafted to demolish my confidence and question my choices. One evening, poring over an especially brutal one, I shattered completely. I collapsed onto the kitchen tiles, the very spot where I'd first heard that recording that upended everything, and sobbed harder than I had since losing my mom. What went wrong with me? I kept wondering. How did I end up with a daughter filled with such rage? For the first time amid this court ordeal, surrender crossed my mind. Perhaps it'd be simpler to withdraw the claims, pardon Grace, and attempt mending our tie. Perhaps I'd blown things out of proportion. Perhaps their affection was real, their motives just misunderstood by me. Right as I nearly dialed Attorney Ford to halt the case, a memory shifted my view entirely. I hauled myself up and headed to my bedroom, to the little box holding my life's treasured keepsakes. I rummaged until I uncovered it. A note from my mother, penned in her frail hand just before she passed, when Grace was 8. "My beloved Margaret," it began in her trembling script. "If you're holding this, I've left this world. Know I'm immensely proud of you as a person and parent. You've nurtured Grace with such tenderness and commitment. I'm certain she'll grow into someone who cherishes you forever." I read on, eyes blurring with tears. "Yet if troubles arise, if anyone aims to wound you or exploit your kindness, recall your inner strength. Let no one, not even your child, stomp on your worth. Real affection doesn't aim to break, doesn't steal, doesn't demean." The closing words fueled my resolve. "Margaret, you merit honor. You merit authentic care. You merit serene, dignified days ahead. If they can't offer that, they don't deserve your presence, blood ties or none." That evening, after weeks of restless nights, I finally rested easy. My mother had it right. Genuine love doesn't demolish. It doesn't. It doesn't plot the demise of a family member for monetary gain. The sentiment Grace expressed toward me wasn't genuine affection. It was merely financial self-interest masquerading as parental warmth. The following morning, I arose with fresh resolve. I contacted lawyer Ford and declared, "Proceed with every accusation, counsel. I'm refusing to withdraw any of them. Let's take this matter to its conclusion." "That's encouraging news, Ms. Baker," he responded, "especially since I have significant updates. Grace and Richard are pushing for a settlement outside the courtroom. They're desperate to dodge a trial in the open." "What terms are they proposing?" I inquired. "They're offering to repay every cent they took, cover all losses, and vow to sever all contact with you, provided you dismiss the prosecution." I pondered the offer thoroughly. In one respect, I'd reclaim my funds and escape their schemes indefinitely. Yet, in another, they'd evade the complete repercussions of their misconduct. "Counsel," I concluded, "I'll agree to the deal, but add one stipulation. Require them to execute a comprehensive admission of their deeds, openly declaring my sound mind and debunking their claims about my sanity. Moreover, publish that statement wherever they slandered me." "A shrewd move, Ms. Baker," the lawyer noted. "It'll fully vindicate your name and halt their attacks." 7 days afterward, Grace and Richard inked the pact. I retrieved my $8,750 along with an extra $15,000 for harms inflicted. Yet beyond the finances, I regained my serenity and self-respect. Their open admission proved ruinous for them, but freeing for me. We, Grace Baker and Richard Williams, acknowledge falsely, charging Ms. Margaret with psychological issues. We confess to scheming to seize her assets and forging papers to deem her unfit. Ms. Margaret possesses full mental capacity, and we fabricated those tales to rationalize our illicit schemes. Precisely 1 month after discovering that pivotal recording that transformed my world, I understood I'd accomplished the unattainable. I'd overcome those who sought my ruin, achieving it through wit, poise, and unwavering adherence to justice. Still, my journey continued. I now faced constructing a fresh existence, clear on my vision for it. With the pact sealed and my standing fully mended, the moment arrived for pivotal choices in my renewed phase. Gone was the trusting Margaret who'd tolerated exploitation for years. In her place stood a 66-year-old who grasped that real fortitude arises not from suffering mistreatment, but from safeguarding oneself astutely and honorably. My initial step involved overhauling my testament entirely. I brought lawyer Ford to my home and outlined my updated directives. Counsel, direct every holding. This residence, all accounts, to the Golden Hope Foundation, aiding elders forsaken by kin. "Are you utterly certain, Ms. Baker?" he queried. "It's a substantial legacy, roughly $490,000, encompassing the property, funds, and awards." "Absolutely," I affirmed resolutely. "Let it support those in genuine need, not selfish offspring viewing elders as profit sources." I further specified that any challenge by Grace would forfeit her claim to even a single dollar. Next, I chose relocation. I refused to remain in the dwelling of treachery, where I'd overheard my daughter plotting my downfall. "Counsel, list this home for sale and secure modest quarters suited to my situation." Within 3 weeks, I located an ideal spot. A charming unit in a senior living community boasting landscapes, leisure spaces, and peers who cherished autonomy and respect. It set me back $85,000. Coupled with $95,000 from the proceeds and the settlements, I secured ample resources for a secure future. Yet my keenest lawful retribution against Grace and Richard struck deepest. In probing with the lawyer, we uncovered their deceit on income declarations over 3 prior years. They'd understated earnings to minimize tax burdens, all while maintaining appearances inconsistent with those figures. "Ms. Baker," the lawyer shared, grinning, "I've got details that could pique the IRS's interest." He presented proof of Richard's undeclared freelance work and Grace's unreported online sales. "Counsel, as an upstanding individual, I feel compelled to notify authorities of known fiscal irregularities." I flashed him a genuine smile that lit up my face. After all, everyone has to pitch in equally to keep the nation running. Just 7 days later, the IRS launched a thorough examination of Richard and Grace's finances. The audit revealed they were short $22,000 in unpaid taxes, and with added fines and interest, the full amount climbed to $35,000. Lacking the funds to cover it, they ended up selling their vehicle, hawking their valuables, and securing costly loans to dodge prison time for dodging taxes. My next act of payback hit their careers. In probing deeper, we uncovered that Carol, the cousin employed at the county clerk's office, wasn't the sole government worker tangled in the scheme. A whole web of graft had enabled such scams targeting the elderly. Teaming up with lawyer Ford, we handed over every detail to the proper officials. The probe led to the ousting of 6 government staffers, Carol included, and unearthed no fewer than 12 other instances like mine, where they'd swindled older folks' properties via forged papers. Once the uproar hit the local press, Grace and Richard turned into the poster children for ungrateful offspring, preying on their aging parents. Their faces and names splashed across the front pages under screaming titles such as "Family Treachery Stuns Community" and "Offspring Plot to Swipe 66-Year-Old Mom's House." Yet my sharpest retaliation played out on the social front. Grace held a position at a high-profile firm where one's image was key to climbing the ladder. Her manager, spotting the news in the papers, summoned her for a tense sit-down. "We can't tolerate staff caught up in domestic swindles," he informed her. "Our business's good name is at stake." He held off on termination right away, but shifted her to a minor role and underscored that advancement was off the table for the foreseeable future. Richard suffered fallout at work, too. His boss, hearing how he'd joined a plot to cheat his mother-in-law, confronted him. "If you're willing to rob your relatives, what stops you from ripping us off?" He watched his shot at that desired raise vanish. What gratified me deepest, though, was witnessing their circle turn their backs. Richard's sibling cut off contact once the truth emerged. "How could you join in something so heartless toward an elder who'd always shown you kindness?" she yelled during a heated family clash that neighbors overheard. Grace's acquaintances drifted away bit by bit. The parents in her group shunned anyone who'd so viciously turned on her own parent. If she could do that to the lady who brought her into the world, imagine what she'd do to the rest of us, they'd murmur in private. Even longtime spots like the grocery store and drugstore became places of stares and hushed gossip. They'd morphed into a cautionary tale against mistreating seniors. All along, I operated without spite or vengeful urges. Each step I took stayed within the law, morally sound and entirely warranted. I never spread lies or cooked up bogus claims. I avoided intimidation or any physical harm. I merely let the fallout from their choices unfold as it would. 6 months from hearing that damning recording, I bumped into Grace at the shopping center. She appeared worn out, exhausted, and way beyond her 35 years. Spotting me, she came over with tears streaming. "Mom," she uttered in a shaky tone, "please pardon me. I get that you're upset, but we've suffered plenty. We've forfeited it all. Our finances are wrecked. Richard missed out on his raise. I settled for a gig paying less. Isn't that penalty sufficient?" I met her gaze steadily, free of bitterness, yet firm. "Grace, I didn't deliver any penalty. Your deeds did that to you. You chose to scheme against me. I chose to protect myself." "But we're kin," she begged. "Family ties run deep, Mom. You can't just disown your sole child." "Ties of blood don't license abuse, theft, or plotting harm," I responded evenly. "I spent 35 years as your devoted parent. You spent 3 months as my scheming foe. You can't expect me to erase that merely because you're reaping what you sowed." "So, no pardon then," she sobbed. "I have pardoned you, Grace," I said truthfully. Letting go was vital for my inner calm, but pardon isn't erasure or a green light for more pain. It isn't acting like it never occurred. It isn't handing you tools to wreck me anew. I left her weeping there amid the stores and headed to my fresh condo. There, a fresh chapter of my existence was calling me, a chapter in which I refused to be anyone's prey any longer, where I didn't have to feign that mistreatment equated to affection, where I could stop trading my self-respect for poisonous bonds. For the first time in over 40 years, I tasted true liberation. 1 year following that fateful meeting in the shopping center, my world had veered onto a trajectory I could scarcely have dreamed of. Now 67, I stirred that spring dawn in my lovely flat, sunlight streaming past the sheer drapes I'd picked out myself, free from anyone's critique about their cost or pointlessness. I brewed my coffee in the compact yet ideal kitchen tailored to me, then settled on the terrace to gaze at the community gardens. Far off fellow dwellers were stretching with their morning routines, nurturing greenery, or just savoring the calm. We formed a circle of elders committed to spending our twilight years with grace and autonomy. "Good morning, Margaret," called out my neighbor Nora, a spry 72-year-old who'd evolved into my closest confidant, set for dance lessons this afternoon. I grinned, recalling how I'd launched into dancing at 67, an adventure I'd never envisioned. "Absolutely, Nora. These aged limbs still pack plenty of spark." In that year, I'd unearthed a facet of myself long buried under the weight of time. Relieved of the endless duty to appease Grace, unburdened by the tension of tiptoeing through my home, I'd flourished like a bloom finally kissed by rays. I'd signed up for art sessions and uncovered a gift for capturing scenery. My canvases now graced my walls, and several had fetched buyers at the neighborhood exhibit. Miss Baker, who ran the event, remarked, "Your works radiate a serenity and insight that stirs souls." I'd also linked up with the volunteer team at the Golden Hope Foundation, the very group slated to receive my estate. 3 days weekly, I aided fellow elders discarded or harmed by kin. "Margaret, you grasp our suffering because you've endured it yourself," shared Miss Carmen, an 81-year-old who'd sought refuge there after her offspring ousted her from her dwelling. At the center, I'd emerged as an informal guide. Those arriving shattered and despairing drew hope from my journey, proof that renewal was feasible, that one could forge an honorable existence post the deepest kin disloyalty. "Miss Margaret, how on earth did you find the strength to pardon and press forward?" inquired Mr. Robert, a 75-year-old whose heirs had drained his savings. I'd responded, "Mr. Robert, absolution isn't about erasure or inviting fresh wounds. It's about purging bitterness from our souls to embrace serenity. Yet serenity demands distance from the wounders, blood ties notwithstanding." My role there had ignited a mission I deemed impossible at my stage. We'd assisted 47 elders in reclaiming pilfered funds from relatives. 23 had overturned bogus papers branding them unfit, and 15 had secured stable new abodes after eviction by their progeny. Yet the greatest revelation was reclaiming my inherent worth. For 66 years, I'd gauged my merit by my capacity to serve, to yield, to bear anguish quietly. Now I grasped that my essence as a human hinged not on utility to others, but on authenticity to my core and honoring my limits. Regarding Grace and Richard, snippets from shared contacts trickled in now and then. They'd relocated to a modest, budget-friendly unit. Richard's career ascent had stalled for good, landing him in a lesser role with slimmer pay. Grace had taken on extra freelance hours to tackle their mounting bills. But the recurring whisper was turmoil in their union. Devoid of the fallback of my home, they turned accusations inward over their botched scheme. Ms. Rose, my former neighbor, mentioned their endless quarrels pinning fault for the exposure. Curiously, this stirred no triumphant glee in me, only profound sorrow for their choices. They'd ravaged not just our ties, but their bond too. Avarice had acted like a toxin, tainting all it encountered. 6 months prior, Grace's letter had arrived. I delayed opening it for 3 full days, weighing whether to confront her words. At last, with Nora by my side for bolstering, I unsealed it. "Dear Mom," it opened. "I realize I hold no claim to request favors, but please know I rue my actions against you every single day. I've started sessions with a therapist, and now I finally came to realize how inexcusable my behavior truly was. This message isn't meant to plead for your pardon or a return to our bond. All I seek is for you to recognize that I've grasped the full extent of the pain I inflicted upon you." The correspondence went on to explain further. Through sessions with my counselor, I recognized that my choices stem not from dire financial straits, but from a self-centered attitude I'd cultivated gradually. I grew accustomed to your unwavering support to the point where I no longer viewed you as an individual with emotions and boundaries, but rather as a means to my ends that I could take advantage of without remorse. Today I see that in your later years, you merited true regard, sincere warmth, and thoughtful attention. What I offered instead was deceit, falsehoods, and disloyalty. Due to my avarice and folly, I forfeited the most wonderful mother anyone could have. The note closed with words that brought tears to my eyes. I hold no hope for your absolution, Mother, as I recognize I'm unworthy of it. My only wish is that you're content and that you've attained the serenity you were always entitled to, signed with unending remorse and affection. Grace. That correspondence required weeks for me to absorb on an emotional level. Part of me felt relief knowing Grace at last comprehended the severity of her deeds. Yet, on the flip side, the opportunity to mend our connection had long passed. Certain injuries, though they might mend over time, etch marks so profound that returning to the prior state proves impossible. I'd penned a concise yet sincere reply, "Grace, I acknowledge your remorse and appreciate that you're pursuing therapeutic guidance. I grant you forgiveness, for harboring resentment would only burden me further, yet pardoning doesn't equate to erasing the past, nor does it restore lost faith in you. I extend my hopes for your future happiness, though my own existence now thrives in tranquility apart from you. Warmly, yet with no path for reconciliation, your mother." During serene evenings in my fresh residence, I frequently contemplated the insights this ordeal had imparted. The key takeaway was that authentic affection never aims to harm or possess the beloved. Genuine care honors, safeguards, and prioritizes the other's happiness without demanding reciprocity. I'd also discovered that establishing limits isn't harshness, but a vital act of self-preservation. For years, I'd mistaken boundless giving for parental devotion, inadvertently signaling to Grace that she could wrong me with impunity. In conversations with the women from the support circle at the foundation, I'd occasionally share, "The most valuable legacy we pass to our offspring isn't wealth or assets, but the model that everyone, even their own parent, commands honor and self-worth." On that mild spring dawn, while sipping my coffee on the terrace, a phone call came from Lawyer Ford. "Ms. Baker, I've got updates that could be relevant to you. Recently, I've heard from sources about 3 additional instances akin to your own surfacing. The impacted households are eager for you to recount your approach to handling such predicaments." "Absolutely, Counselor," I answered promptly. "If recounting my experiences aids others in protecting themselves, I'm fully prepared to do so." Later that day, while capturing a scenic vista on my canvas, I pondered the remarkable path I'd traversed over the preceding 18 months. I'd begun as a subdued sufferer and evolved into a resilient advocate, now assisting fellow survivors in uncovering their inner fortitude. The ring of my cell phone broke my reverie. It was Nora proposing we dine at the trendy eatery in the city center. "Margaret, come on, let's honor the gift of living," she urged with her infectious zeal. Preparing for the outing, I gazed into the glass and beheld a transformed figure compared to the one from a year and a half prior. My gaze sparkled with newfound assurance I'd lacked before. I stood tall and assured, my grin authentic and unweighted by inner turmoil. "Margaret," I whispered to my reflection, "at 67, you've at last understood that your existence is yours alone and that you merit embracing it with honor, delight, and calm." That evening, sharing a meal with my selected circle of companions rather than my harmful kin, we lifted glasses to fresh starts, the insights age bestows, and the bravery to uphold justice no matter the cost. As I held my wine aloft, my mind turned to the countless women then enduring familial abuse, convinced they had no choices, compelled to tolerate harm in the name of kinship. Should my tale inspire even one such soul to stand up for herself, the trials I'd faced would hold profound value. For at times, the richest bequest we inherit isn't fortune or estates, but the resolve to honor our essence and the awareness that reclaiming our narrative is always possible, no matter the timeline. It's never too late to favor self-respect above ease, honesty over illusory calm, and personal regard over ruinous yielding, and it's eternally timely to embrace liberation. What did you think of my account? And from which town are you tuning in? Share in the replies below. If the narrative resonated with you, if you could show some love with a super thanks, it'd help me keep sharing these kinds of tales. A huge thanks for your amazing encouragement. I can't wait to hear your thoughts on this one. Take a look at the 2 fresh life experiences showing up right now. They're ones I really suggest checking out. My channel's packed with even more goodies. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. Until the next story, cheers, with all my appreciation and warmth.